During our honeymoon, my mother-in-law pulled off a shocking betrayal by stealing my $25,000 diamond necklace. When we got home and I asked her about it, she exploded in anger. She slapped me hard and pushed me against the wall. To my surprise, my husband stood by her side. Heartbroken, I left the house, planning my revenge. They had no idea I had a big surprise coming that would change everything. My name's Lisa, and I'm a 30-year-old software developer living in San Francisco. When I think back to my life, I can still remember the excitement of my wedding day, the hope I felt for the future, and the way my heart swelled with love for my college sweetheart, James. We had met during our university years and bonded over late-night study sessions and shared dreams of what our lives would look like. I thought I had found my perfect partner. But as the saying goes, the path to true happiness isn't always smooth. Shortly after we exchanged vows, I realized that my fairy tale was beginning to unravel. The first signs of trouble were subtle, like a slow leak in a tire that gradually worsens until you're stranded on the side of the road. The culprit? James's mother, Martha. Martha, a woman in her mid-50s, raised James on her own and had always been fiercely protective of him. I had seen this dynamic during our dating years. She often called him several times a day, insisting on knowing his whereabouts and opinions on everything. I had assumed it was just a quirky part of their relationship, something I could work around. After all, love is about compromise, right? But once we were married, her interference turned into something much more invasive. Almost immediately, Martha began criticizing my choices, everything from the way I decorated our home to the meals I prepared. I remember one particular instance when she visited unannounced and found me experimenting with a new recipe. "What are you cooking, Lisa?" "That looks awful," she said with a disdainful look on her face, as if she were inspecting a science experiment gone wrong. "Just trying a new pasta dish, Martha," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. "Isn't it a bit too rich?" "You should stick to the basics," she retorted, shaking her head. I felt my cheeks flush with embarrassment, but I tried to brush it off. I thought she means well. I kept reminding myself that she was just trying to help, even when it felt like she was tearing me down. As weeks turned into months, her visits became more frequent and less welcome. She would drop by without calling, using a spare key that I didn't even know she had. I would walk into our living room, only to find her rearranging the furniture as if it were her own home. "This will give the space a better flow," she would say, waving her hand dismissively when I expressed my hesitations. The tension between Martha and me grew, and James seemed oblivious. Whenever I would try to bring it up, he would shrug it off, saying things like, "You know how my mom is. Just try to be patient." It was infuriating. How could he not see how her behavior was affecting me? I began to feel isolated, trapped in a situation where my voice was drowned out by his mother's constant interference. The love I felt for James started to fade under the weight of frustration and hurt. Then, one day, James suggested we go on a honeymoon to Hawaii, a chance to reconnect and escape the chaos. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Finally, a break for Martha. However, that relief was short-lived when Martha insisted on joining us. "James, I don't think that's a good idea," I said, trying to mask my panic. But James, for the first time, stood his ground. "Mom, it's not a family trip. It's our honeymoon, just Lisa and me." I was stunned. This was the first time I saw him assert himself against his mother, and it filled me with hope. Maybe there was a chance for us after all. When we returned from the trip, everything seemed to be in place. James and I had rekindled our romance, and I was excited to return home. But when I opened the door to our bedroom, my heart dropped. Our room was a disaster zone. Clothes were thrown everywhere, jewelry drawers were broken, and my precious diamond necklace, a wedding gift from my mother worth $25,000, was missing. "James, come here," I screamed, my voice shaking. "What's wrong?" he asked, rushing into the room. "I can't find my necklace. Look at this mess. What happened here?" I gestured wildly at the chaos. James's face paled as he surveyed the room. "I don't know." "This is so strange," he muttered, confusion and concern etched across his face. Desperate, I turned to him. Do you think it could be? No, Lisa. I can't believe my mother would do something like this, he interrupted, his tone defensive. I swallowed hard, feeling a knot form in my stomach. But deep down, the suspicion crept in. I couldn't shake the feeling that Martha was somehow involved. I needed to find answers. That night, sleep eluded me as I tossed and turned, haunted by the disarray of our bedroom and the absence of my cherished necklace. I couldn't understand how Martha could betray me like this. The woman who I thought was merely overbearing had transformed into someone I feared. The following day, I decided to take action. I visited several jewelry stores in the area, searching for any sign of my necklace. After hours of looking and nearly giving up hope, I entered a small shop tucked away in a corner of the city. As I scanned the displays, my heart stopped. There it was, my diamond necklace gleaming under the glass. "Excuse me," I called the shopkeeper over. "Can I see that necklace, please?" When I held it in my hands, it felt like the ground beneath me shifted. I needed to know who had sold it. "Can you show me the CCTV footage from when this necklace came in?" I asked, my voice steady despite the chaos in my mind. The shopkeeper obliged, and as I watched the footage, my heart sank. There, clearly on the screen, was Martha, my mother-in-law, handing over my precious necklace. I felt a whirlwind of emotions: betrayal, anger, and disbelief. Furious, I rushed home, ready to confront her. But as I approached the door, I found Martha waiting for me, arms crossed and a smug smile on her face. "What are you doing here, Lisa? You look like you've seen a ghost," she sneered. "Don't play games with me, Martha." "I know what you did," I snapped, my heart pounding. Her smile faltered for a moment, and in that split second, I felt a surge of confidence. I had the proof, but what happened next would change everything. I was about to confront the woman who had wreaked havoc in my life. I just didn't know how deep the betrayal would run. Standing at the doorstep, I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts. Martha's presence was suffocating, and I felt the anger bubbling inside me like a volcano ready to erupt. I had never imagined confronting my mother-in-law would feel like this, like stepping into a battlefield where the stakes were so high. "Lisa, why are you staring at me like that? If you have something to say, just say it," Martha said, her tone dripping with mockery. "Enough with the games, Martha. I know you sold my diamond necklace." I blurted out, my voice shaking with a mix of rage and disbelief. "I saw you on the security footage at the jewelry store." Her expression changed instantaneously. The smugness vanished, replaced by a flicker of anger. "How dare you accuse me of stealing?" she retorted, her voice rising. "You've always had a wild imagination, haven't you?" "I'm not imagining anything. You took something that doesn't belong to you, and it's time you admit it." I shot back, stepping closer to her, unwilling to let her intimidation tactics work on me this time. Martha's eyes narrowed as she took a step forward, invading my personal space. "You think you can come into my house and throw accusations at me? You're just jealous that I raised James alone and that he still cares for me. You'll never be as important as his mother," she spat, her voice full of venom. "Being his wife doesn't mean I'm less important. You need to understand that I'm part of this family too, but you act like I'm just an inconvenience," I replied, my heart racing. I felt an overwhelming need to defend myself, to make her see that I was not going to back down this time. Suddenly, James walked through the door, a bag of groceries in hand. The moment he saw us standing there, tension thick in the air, he dropped the bag and rushed over. "What's going on? Why does it look like you two are about to kill each other?" "Martha has been lying to me, James. I know she sold my necklace, and I'm done pretending everything is fine," I said, my voice rising. I turned to him, desperate for support. "You need to believe me. I have proof." James looked between us, confusion etched on his face. "Mom, is this true?" he asked, his tone wavering. "I didn't do anything. Lisa is just trying to stir up trouble because she can't handle the fact that I'm still in your life," Martha interjected, throwing her hands up defensively. James's gaze shifted from his mother to me, and I could see the turmoil in his eyes. "I need to hear this from both of you. What exactly happened?" he asked, trying to mediate. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. I found the necklace in a pawn shop, James. I have the footage. Your mother sold it while we were on our honeymoon, I explained, the words rushing out of me. James turned to Martha, who was now visibly sweating, her composure cracking. Is that true? Did you sell Lisa's necklace? I borrowed it, she stammered, trying to twist the narrative. I thought it was just lying around. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. Borrowed? It's not borrowing if you sell it. I shouted, my frustration boiling over. You stole it. You knew how much it meant to me. Stop yelling, both of you, James shouted, his voice echoing in the small entryway. This is not helping. Mom, why would you do something like this? It was a mistake. Martha snapped, her defensive nature kicking in. I thought it was just an old piece of jewelry, something that was forgotten. I didn't know it was special to her. Enough of your excuses, I exclaimed. You've done nothing but disrespect me since day one. I've tried to be patient, but this is crossing a line. James's silence was deafening. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for him to pull me back or let me fall. I can't believe this, James finally said, looking defeated. Mom, you have to understand what you did is unacceptable. We need to figure out how to fix this. Fix this? How can we fix this when she's made it clear she doesn't trust me? I said, pointing at Martha. I'm done being the one who has to compromise. You need to make a choice, James. Martha's eyes flashed with anger as she took a step back, her expression darkening. You think you can come into our family and make demands? You're nothing without my son. That statement stung like a slap to the face, and I felt tears prick my eyes. I am not nothing. I am his wife, and I deserve your respect. James looked between us, visibly torn. I need time to think, he finally said, his voice low. I can't deal with this right now. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving me alone with Martha. The tension hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I felt a sense of despair wash over me, knowing that things had reached a breaking point. Your husband is weak, Lisa, Martha sneered, her voice dripping with disdain. You'll never win this fight. I will always be his mother. In that moment, I knew I couldn't stay in this toxic environment any longer. I felt like a puppet on strings, and it was time to cut them. I needed to reclaim my life, my identity, and my dignity. With that thought, I turned on my heel and walked out, determined to find a way to seek justice for the betrayal I had suffered. Leaving James and Martha in that heated moment was one of the hardest things I had ever done. I felt like I was walking away from my marriage, but I knew that staying would only lead to more heartache. As I drove back to my mother's house, my heart raced with a mix of fear and determination. I couldn't let Martha's betrayal go unpunished. When I arrived, my mother was in the kitchen, humming to herself as she prepared dinner. The smell of her famous lasagna filled the air, and for a brief moment, I felt comforted. But the weight of my troubles came crashing back as I recounted the events of the day. Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry you're going through this, my mother said, her eyes filled with concern. You deserve so much better. I need to do something about it, Mom. I can't just let her get away with this, I replied, my voice firm. I'm going to report her to the police. My mother's face reflected my own determination. If that's what you think is best, then I support you. We'll gather any evidence you need. That night, we pored over the footage from the jewelry store and made a list of everything that had happened. I documented my conversations with James, highlighting how dismissive he had been about Martha's behavior. I felt empowered, like I was taking back control over my life. The next day, I contacted the local police department and scheduled an appointment to report the theft. As I prepared for my meeting, I felt a whirlwind of emotions, nervousness, anger, but also a sense of purpose. I was no longer the quiet wife being pushed around. I was ready to stand up for myself. When I arrived at the station, I was greeted by an officer who took me into a small room to discuss my case. I showed him the footage of Martha selling the necklace and explained the situation. The officer listened intently, nodding along as I spoke. This is a serious matter, Ms. Miller. Theft is not something we take lightly. We'll need to investigate further, but I assure you that we will do everything we can to help you, he said, his tone reassuring. Relief washed over me as I left the station. I had taken the first step toward justice, and I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I was determined to see this through, no matter how hard it might be. Over the next few days, the police worked diligently on my case, collecting evidence and reaching out to pawn shops in the area. They were able to confirm the sale of my necklace and also uncovered additional details that pointed to Martha's history of questionable behavior. One afternoon, as I was sitting at my mother's kitchen table, my phone rang. It was the officer I had spoken to earlier. Ms. Miller, we've gathered enough evidence to move forward with an arrest. Would you like to be present when we take your mother-in-law into custody? He asked. I hesitated for a moment, the gravity of the situation hitting me. But then I remembered how much Martha had hurt me, how she had invaded my life and disrespected my marriage. Yes, I want to be there, I replied, my voice steady. The following day, I drove to the location where they had planned to arrest Martha. My heart raced as I waited, anxiety bubbling beneath the surface. I couldn't believe it had come to this. My mother-in-law, the woman who was supposed to support me, was about to face the consequences of her actions. When the police arrived, they approached Martha as she was leaving her house, her usual air of arrogance stripped away. I watched from a distance, my heart pounding in my chest. Martha Ellen, you are under arrest for theft, the officer announced, and I felt a surge of triumph rush through me. This was justice. As they handcuffed her and led her away, I stood there, watching her world crumble. I realized that I was finally free from the chains that had bound me, and in that moment, I felt empowered. I was no longer the victim. I was a survivor, ready to reclaim my life. The day Martha was arrested marked a pivotal moment in my life. I had faced her down and taken control of my own narrative. After the police took her away, I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and an undeniable sense of empowerment. I knew that I had done the right thing, but the reality of the situation weighed heavily on my heart. In the days that followed, I found myself in a whirlwind of legal processes. Martha's arrest led to charges of theft, and I learned that she would likely face serious consequences for her actions. I felt a sense of closure starting to form, but I also had to confront the fact that my marriage with James was hanging by a thread. James reached out to me multiple times, pleading for a chance to talk. I was hesitant, but knew we needed to address the elephant in the room. One evening, we met at a coffee shop halfway between our homes. As I walked in, I felt a mixture of hope and dread. Could we salvage our relationship, or had too much damage been done? Lisa, I'm so glad you agreed to meet, James said, his voice shaky as he sat down across from me. I've been worried sick about you. I've been worried about you too, James, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. But we need to talk about everything that's happened. You need to understand how hurtful your mother's actions were and how your support, or lack thereof, affected me. He nodded, looking down at his coffee. I know. I can't believe she would do something like that. I should have stood up for you sooner. I'm sorry. Sorry isn't enough, James. Your mother has caused irreparable harm, I said, my voice rising slightly. I've lost trust in both of you. You need to decide whose side you're on. I'm on your side, Lisa. I love you, he exclaimed, desperation creeping into his voice. Then you need to prove it. I can't continue in a marriage where I feel like a second-class citizen, I replied, trying to keep my emotions in check. You need to choose between me and her. We talked for hours, but it was clear that the rift between us was too wide. Although he professed his love for me, I couldn't shake the feeling that his loyalty to his mother would always come first. As we parted ways that evening, I knew I had made my decision. The following week, I filed for divorce. It was painful, but I felt lighter, as if I had shed a weight I had been carrying for far too long. Martha's court date was set for a few weeks later. When the day arrived, I felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation as I entered the courtroom. I wanted to see justice served, to show Martha that her actions had consequences. When she walked in, she looked older, more haggard than I had ever seen her. It was a stark reminder of how far things had fallen. The proceedings were swift. The evidence was clear, and it didn't take long for the judge to issue a verdict. Martha was sentenced to community service and ordered to pay restitution for the necklace, along with additional fines totaling $25,000. As the gavel struck, I felt a surge of vindication. This was justice, and I had finally reclaimed my life. With the divorce finalized shortly after and Martha's fate sealed, I began to embrace my newfound freedom. I focused on my career, pouring my energy into projects that inspired me. I took up new hobbies, explored the city, and spent quality time with my mother, who had been my rock throughout this tumultuous journey. In the months that followed, I learned to cherish my independence. I discovered my strength in solitude and began to rebuild my life on my terms. I reflected on the lessons I had learned about trust, respect, and the importance of standing up for myself. As I sat in my apartment one evening, sipping a glass of wine and watching the sunset over the city skyline, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I was no longer bound by the toxicity of my past. I had turned the page and was ready to embrace a bright new chapter filled with hope and possibilities. I had faced betrayal and fought for justice, and now I was finally free.
This story is titled, My Parents Hid the Secret That My Sister Cheated on Me with My Husband, but at her baby shower, the gift I gave ignited an overwhelming wave of violence against them. Hey, I don't even know where to begin with this, so I'll just start at the beginning. My name's Alina, 30 female. I grew up in Chicago with my older sister Julia, 32 female, and my parents. And honestly, I've always felt like I was just the extra kid. Julia was the one everyone doted on. She was the pretty one, the smart one, the golden child. Me? I was just there, the responsible one, the one they could count on to figure it out or not make a fuss. That's their way of saying I didn't matter as much. It wasn't like they were evil or anything. They just made it really clear, in 100 little ways, that Julia came first. Like, in middle school, I worked my butt off to win the regional spelling bee. I was so excited when I came home with the trophy. I thought they'd be proud. But my dad barely looked up from the newspaper, and my mom said, "That's nice, sweetie, but did you hear Julia got asked to the spring dance? Isn't that so exciting?" High school was worse. I made the varsity swim team, which was a big deal because I was just a freshman. But Julia was a senior and got a lead in the school play. Guess which one they showed up for? It wasn't the swim meets. I remember sitting in the car after a big competition, holding my first place medal, and my dad asking if I could give Julia a ride to her play rehearsal. I wanted to throw the medal at him, but I just said sure. Even now, as adults, it hasn't stopped. A few years ago, when Julia bought her first house, my parents helped with the down payment. They even paid her closing costs. When I mentioned needing help with car repairs, my mom said, "Oh, sweetie, maybe you should budget better." Like, okay, I'll just budget better next time my transmission goes out. Cool. Anyway, the point is, Julia's always been the favorite. I never hated her for it, though. I figured that's just how families are sometimes, you know? I thought she cared about me, that we were close despite all the weird favoritism. But last week, I found out how wrong I was. It started when I went to my parents' house to drop off some paperwork my mom had asked for. Nothing dramatic, just insurance stuff she needed me to fill out because apparently, I'm the only one who knows how to handle paperwork. When I walked in, they were sitting in the living room. My mom was on the phone, and I could hear her on speaker. I wasn't paying much attention until I heard Julia's voice. She said, "Mom, Alina can't find out about me and Jay. Jay, my husband." I froze. My mom said something like, "Don't worry, sweetie, she won't. It's better this way. You've got so much on the line." My dad chimed in with, "Yeah, let's not ruin your life over one mistake." My heart felt like it stopped. My own sister, my husband, and my parents knew? I felt like I'd been sucker punched. I quietly backed out of the house and left. I didn't even grab the paperwork. I just got in my car and drove home, trying to wrap my head around what I'd just heard. When I got home, Jay was there, sitting on the couch like everything was fine. I couldn't even look at him. I went straight to the bathroom and locked the door. I sat on the floor for what felt like hours, trying to figure out what to do. Part of me wanted to barge into the living room and scream at him. Another part of me wanted to drive straight to Julia's house and confront her. But mostly, I just felt numb. For the next few days, I kept to myself. Jay kept asking me if something was wrong, but I couldn't talk to him. Every time I opened my mouth, I felt like I was going to cry or throw up. I couldn't even text Julia. I knew if I tried, I'd lose it completely. The thing is, this isn't just about the cheating. It's about the betrayal from all sides. My sister, who I thought I could trust. My parents, who I thought were supposed to love me. They all knew, and none of them cared enough to tell me. They cared more about protecting Julia's perfect image than protecting me. I spent a lot of time just sitting in my car, driving around aimlessly, trying to figure out what to do. I didn't want to confront them without proof. What if they denied it? What if they made me feel like I was crazy? So, I decided to wait. I didn't know what I was waiting for exactly, but I knew I needed to keep my cool until I had a plan. Then, a few days later, my mom called me, all cheerful, like nothing was wrong. "Alina, honey, can you help plan Julia's baby shower?" she asked, like she wasn't actively covering for Julia sleeping with my husband. Oh, yeah. Did I mention Julia's pregnant? And now I don't even know if the baby's her husband Nate's or if it's Jay's. The audacity of her asking me to plan this party was almost laughable, but instead of blowing up at her, I said, "Sure, Mom, I'd love to help." After that call with my mom, I was done feeling sorry for myself. It wasn't just about Julia sleeping with Jay anymore. It was about all of them thinking they could get away with it. My parents, my sister, my husband, they were treating me like I was some kind of clueless idiot who'd just smile and go along with everything. That pissed me off more than anything. But I knew I couldn't just blow up and start yelling. No one would take me seriously, and they'd probably twist it around to make me look like the bad guy. Julia's always been good at playing the victim, and I wasn't going to give her that chance. If I wanted to confront them, I needed proof. Not just vague suspicions or overheard conversations. I needed hard evidence they couldn't deny. So that night, after Jay fell asleep, I grabbed his phone. Normally, I'd feel weird about going through someone's stuff, but honestly, after what I'd overheard, I didn't feel guilty at all. I didn't even know what I was looking for at first, but it didn't take long to find something. Jay wasn't exactly a mastermind when it came to hiding things. He had a folder on his phone labeled Receipts. Real subtle, right? And when I opened it, there they were. Photos of him and Julia. Some were just selfies, but others were, well, let's just say there was no mistaking what was going on. One picture was of the two of them at a hotel. Julia was in a bathrobe, and Jay was grinning like a damn fool. I didn't cry. I thought I would, but I didn't. I just stared at the pictures, saving them to my own phone one by one. My hands were shaking, but it wasn't from sadness. It was from pure anger. How could they be so careless? So confident that I'd never find out. After the photos, I went through his messages. There was a long thread between him and Julia, full of inside jokes, "I miss you" texts, and plans to meet up. One text stood out to me. Julia had sent him a picture of a baby onesie with the caption, "Do you think Nate will like this?" That hit me like a ton of bricks. They weren't just having an affair, they were laughing about it, mocking Nate, lying to him, and playing happy families while this whole mess unfolded. I saved the messages and moved on to his email. At first, I thought there wouldn't be anything there. Who emails about affairs, right? But then I found a confirmation email for a hotel booking from a few months ago. The name on the reservation was his, but there was a note about special arrangements for 2 guests. The date lined up perfectly with one of the texts Julia had sent him about getting away for a weekend. I took screenshots of everything, every picture, every message, every email. I even forwarded some of the emails to myself just in case Jay ever tried to delete them. I wasn't going to let them wiggle out of this. Over the next few nights, I kept digging. I went through Jay's laptop, his social media accounts, and even his old backups. At one point, I found a folder of old photos that he probably forgot even existed. There was one picture of him and Julia from a family barbecue a couple of years ago. They were standing a little too close, and Julia had her hand on his arm. Looking back now, it felt like a giant neon sign that I had been too blind to see. But it wasn't just about Jay. I started paying attention to Julia's social media too. She's one of those people who posts everything online. Brunches, shopping trips, yoga sessions, you name it. At first glance, it all seemed harmless. But when I looked closer, I noticed little things. A photo of her at a cafe with 2 cups of coffee on the table, but no one else in the frame. A picture of her at a hotel lobby with the caption, "Weekend Escape," but no tag for Nate or any of her friends. It all started to add up. They weren't even being careful. They thought I was too stupid to notice, too blind to connect the dots. That was their biggest mistake. By the end of the week, I had more evidence than I knew what to do with. Photos, messages, emails, social media posts. It was like a giant puzzle that painted a picture of their betrayal. But I wasn't done yet. I decided to check Julia's husband Nate's social media too. I didn't know what I was expecting to find, but I figured it couldn't hurt. Nate didn't post much, but his recent photos showed a man who looked tired, like something was eating away at him. In one post, he'd written, "Life's full of surprises. Not all of them good." At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. But now I wondered if he knew something was up. I considered reaching out to Nate, but I wasn't sure if that was the right move. What if he didn't believe me? What if he was in on it somehow? The last thing I wanted was to give Julia a heads up before I had my plan fully in place. The final piece of the puzzle came when I stumbled onto a shared family folder my parents kept online. It was mostly full of old photos and documents, but there was one folder marked baby shower plans. I opened it out of curiosity, and there it was, a draft guest list for Julia's shower. My name was listed as the event coordinator. I almost laughed. They wanted me to coordinate the shower for the woman who was sleeping with my husband? The sheer audacity of it was unreal. But that's when it hit me. The shower wasn't just a party, it was the perfect stage. Everyone would be there. Julia, Jay, my parents, Nate, their friends, and family. I closed the folder and sat back, my mind racing. The baby shower wasn't going to be a celebration. It was going to be a reckoning. Everything then started falling into place. I mean, how could I resist? My mom was practically handing me the opportunity on a silver platter, acting like nothing was wrong. The plan wasn't just about exposing Julia and Jay. It was about making everyone see what they'd done. The lies, the betrayal, the absolute sham of their perfect lives. And I wasn't going to hold back. The first step was making sure everything looked normal. I agreed to take charge of the shower, like the good little sister they all expected me to be. My mom was thrilled, texting me nonstop with ideas for decorations, themes, and catering. She even sent me links to Pinterest boards, which honestly was hilarious considering the chaos I was about to unleash. I acted like the perfect team player, messaging Julia and asking her what colors she wanted for the decorations. She replied with pink and gold, for something classy, like she had a clue what class even meant. I didn't let on for a second that I knew about her and Jay. I kept my replies short and sweet, pretending I was too busy to chat much. If she suspected anything, she didn't show it. Once the basics were handled, I started working on the real plan. I had all the evidence saved on my phone, but I needed a way to present it that would leave no room for doubt. At first, I thought about just printing everything out and handing it to people, but that felt too small. I wanted this to be big, undeniable, and impossible for them to ignore. That's when I remembered the projector at the event venue. The shower was being held at this fancy community hall my parents had rented. It came with all the bells and whistles, including a giant screen and a projector system. Perfect. I spent hours putting together a PowerPoint presentation. It was the most effort I'd ever put into something for Julia, and it wasn't even for her benefit. The first few slides were harmless, generic congratulatory messages, and cute baby-themed graphics. But then it shifted. The next slides featured screenshots of Julia and Jay's texts, complete with timestamps. Then came the photos. I chose the most damning ones. I ended the presentation with a short video clip of them in a hotel room. It wasn't explicit or anything, but it didn't need to be. Julia's giggling, "Nate will never find out," was enough. When the presentation was done, I saved it to a USB drive and triple-checked it to make sure it worked. I also backed it up on my phone and emailed it to myself just in case. I wasn't taking any chances. With the evidence ready, I turned my attention back to the party. I needed to make sure everything looked perfect, so no one suspected a thing. I ordered fancy decorations, set up a catering menu, and even designed personalized party favors with Julia's name on them. My mom kept gushing about how proud she was of me for coming together for my sister. Every time she said something like that, I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. The week leading up to the shower was surreal. Jay was acting like nothing was wrong, probably assuming I hadn't noticed anything. Julia was her usual bubbly self, texting me every day with questions about the party. My parents were full of their usual over-the-top excitement, constantly talking about how wonderful it was that Julia was going to be a mom. I played along, smiling and nodding, even though every word they said felt like a slap in the face. But I didn't let it show. If they thought I was oblivious, all the better. The morning of the shower, I arrived at the venue early to set up. Guests started arriving, including Julia and Nate. She looked radiant, like someone who thought she had the world wrapped around her finger. Nate looked tired, but he was trying to keep up appearances. Then there was Jay. He showed up late, of course, and gave me this sheepish smile like he was expecting me to be mad about him not helping. I just waved him off, pretending like I didn't care. If he only knew. My cousin Clara showed up with her phone out, already live streaming for her Instagram followers. She's one of those people who documents everything, and normally it's annoying, but today, it was a blessing. Clara's live stream meant the entire world would see what was about to happen, not just the people in the room. As the party got underway, I made sure everything was running smoothly. People were laughing, eating, and complimenting Julia on how great she looked. My parents were buzzing around, practically glowing with pride. When it was time for speeches, my mom went first, saying how proud she was of Julia and how excited she was to be a grandmother. Julia teared up, of course, because she loves being the center of attention. Then it was my turn. I grabbed the microphone, took a deep breath, and smiled. Julia, I said, you've always been the star of the family. Today, I wanted to give you something truly unforgettable. I walked over to the projector, plugged in the USB drive, and hit play. At first, everything seemed fine. The first slide was a picture of Julia and Nate from one of their trips. Something sweet and harmless to set the mood. People were smiling, nodding, and a few even clapped, thinking it was going to be one of those cheesy, sentimental presentations. Julia looked at me like I was the best sister ever, giving me that fake, grateful smile she's mastered over the years. And then, slide 2 hit. The room went quiet, and I mean dead silent. The slide showed a screenshot of one of Julia and Jay's text conversations. It wasn't anything too explicit, just flirty messages about missing each other and can't wait to see you again. But it was enough to make people shift uncomfortably in their seats. Julia's smile froze, and she glanced at me, confused. Jay, on the other hand, looked like he'd seen a ghost. I didn't pause. I let the next slide roll. A series of photos of Julia and Jay at a hotel. One was just the two of them standing in the lobby, but the next one showed Julia in a bathrobe sitting on the edge of a bed, smiling at Jay, who was standing behind her with his shirt off. That's when the whispers started. What is this? Someone near the front muttered. Is that Jay? That's not Nate, right? Julia's face went from confused to panicked. She stood up, half reaching for the projector, but it was too late. The next slide hit, a short text exchange where Julia joked about how clueless Nate was and how easy it was to keep the secret. Alina! Julia's voice cut through the murmurs. What the hell is this? I ignored her. I didn't even look at her. The presentation rolled on. The next slide was another level shock. It was the video. Just a short clip of Julia and Jay sitting on a hotel bed. That's when the room exploded. Nate shot up from his chair, his face a mix of shock and anger. What the hell is this? He shouted, his voice echoing through the hall. Julia froze. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. Jay, sitting a few seats away, looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. Is this real? Someone in the back asked. What the hell is going on? Clara's live stream was still rolling, capturing every second of the chaos. Her phone was blowing up with comments like, OMG, this is wild, and someone stop the presentation. People at the party started pulling out their phones, filming and texting others. Julia finally found her voice. Alina, stop this! What's wrong with you? She yelled, her face red and her voice cracking. I stood there, calm as ever. I grabbed the microphone and said, What's wrong with me? Julia, maybe you should be asking yourself that question. Sleeping with my husband? Really? And you thought I wouldn't find out? Gasps rippled through the room. Wait, Nate said, holding up his hand. What did you just say? You slept with Jay? He was looking at Julia now, his expression shifting from confused to furious. It's not what it looks like, Julia stammered, tears streaming down her face. I can explain. Explain what? Nate snapped. That you've been screwing her husband? That's a hell of an explanation, Julia. Jay tried to stand up, raising his hands as if to calm everyone down. Let's just talk about this, he said, his voice shaking. I couldn't help but laugh at that. Oh, now you want to talk? You didn't seem too interested in talking when you were sneaking around behind my back. Julia turned to me, her voice desperate. Alina, please, we're family. You didn't have to do this in front of everyone. Family? I said, glaring at her. You're seriously talking about family right now? Where was that family loyalty when you were hooking up with my husband? Don't even try to guilt me, Julia. You made your bed. Now lie in it. My parents, who had been eerily quiet until now, finally decided to jump in. My mom stood up, looking at me with this horrified expression. Alina, enough! You've made your point. This isn't the place for this. Oh, it's exactly the place for this, I shot back. You've been covering for her this whole time, haven't you? Don't think I don't know. You knew about Julia and Jay, and instead of telling me, you helped her keep it a secret. Some mother you are. My dad tried to step in, but Nate cut him off. You knew, he said, pointing at my parents. You knew Julia was cheating on me, and you didn't say anything? It's not like that, my mom said, looking flustered. We were trying to protect... Protect who? I interrupted. Julia, because it sure as hell wasn't me. The room was chaos now. Guests were whispering, phones were buzzing, and my parents were trying to calm Nate down while Julia just stood there crying. Jay, meanwhile, had quietly slipped toward the back of the room, clearly trying to escape. Where do you think you're going? I called out to him. Everyone turned to look as Jay froze, halfway to the door. Alina, he started, but I didn't let him finish. You don't get to walk away from this, I said. You don't get to pretend like you didn't blow up our marriage. You and Julia deserve each other. I'm done with both of you. With that, I handed the microphone to one of the stunned party organizers and walked out. I didn't look back, but I could hear the chaos continuing behind me. As I got to my car, Clara caught up with me, her phone still in her hand. Holy crap, Alina, she said out of breath. I don't even know what to say. People online are freaking out. The live stream is going viral. Good, I said, slamming my car door shut. Let the whole world know what they did. And with that, I drove away, leaving the mess behind me. I spent the next few days ignoring my phone. My mom and dad kept calling, but I didn't bother answering. Jay tried texting me too. Pathetic stuff like, "Can we talk?" And, "You're being unreasonable." Yeah, I'm the unreasonable one. Sure, buddy. I didn't even bother blocking him because honestly, his desperation made me laugh. Then, out of nowhere, I got a message from Mia, one of Julia's closest friends. Mia and I were never super close, but we'd hung out a few times at family events because Julia insisted on dragging her everywhere. She sent me a text that said, "Hey, can we talk? It's about Julia. I saw what happened at the shower." At first, I wasn't sure if I wanted to deal with more drama, but eventually I texted back, "What's up?" Within minutes, she called me, and her voice was shaky. "I don't even know how to say this," Mia started, "but after the shower, I can't stop thinking about some stuff. I think Julia might have been messing around with my husband, Dan." Now, I didn't know Dan very well. He was one of those guys who always looked a little too slick, always dressed a little too perfectly, and always had a smirk that made me side-eye him. But the idea of Julia hooking up with her best friend's husband? At this point, it didn't even surprise me. "What makes you think that?" I asked, trying to sound calm even though I was already convinced Julia was guilty. Mia hesitated. "There have been a lot of little things, like Dan started acting weird around Julia a few months ago. He'd get really defensive if I asked about her, and one time I caught him smiling at his phone while texting her. When I asked who it was, he said it was work stuff. But then I saw the contact name and it just said Jay. I didn't think much of it at the time, but after seeing your presentation at the shower," her voice trailed off. "Mia, you need to check his phone," I said firmly. "If Julia was hooking up with Jay, there's no way she wouldn't go after someone else's husband too. She's trash. I hate to say it, but you probably already know the truth." Mia sighed. "Okay, I'll do it tonight." The next morning, I woke up to about 20 missed calls and texts from Mia. The first one just said, "Call me ASAP." Another said, "I can't believe this." And one simply read, "It's true." I called her back, and as soon as she answered, she burst into tears. "I found everything," she sobbed. "Texts, photos, emails, everything. Julia and Dan have been sleeping together for months. And it gets worse, Alina. He might be the father of her baby." I didn't even know what to say at first. It was so on brand for Julia that I wasn't shocked, but hearing it confirmed still made me furious. "Mia, I'm so sorry," I said finally. "What are you going to do?" "I kicked him out last night," she said through tears. "I couldn't even look at him. He tried to deny it at first, but when I showed him the texts, he just shut up. I told him I wanted a divorce, and he didn't even fight me on it." "Good for you," I said. "You deserve better than that scumbag. And Julia? She's disgusting. I don't even have words for how low she is." Mia sniffled. I can't believe she'd do this to me. I thought she was my friend." "Yeah, I thought she was my sister," I replied bitterly. "Turns out she's just a selfish, cheating mess who doesn't care who she hurts." Mia told me more about what she found. One text stood out. Julia sent Dan a picture of a baby onesie and wrote, "Can't wait to see if it looks like you or Nate." The sheer audacity of it made my blood boil. She wasn't just cheating, she was flaunting it. After Mia dropped the biggest news about Julia's baby potentially being Dan's, it felt like the universe was working overtime to unravel Julia's entire life. And honestly, I wasn't mad about it. For years, she walked around acting like she was untouchable, like nothing she did had consequences. Well, now the consequences were coming, and they weren't pulling any punches. The fallout started with Nate. He didn't waste any time after the baby shower. He kicked her out that same night. Julia tried calling him, probably to spin her usual web of excuses and lies, but Nate wasn't having it. He blocked her number, filed for divorce, and even announced it on social media with a simple post. Starting fresh. Short, but brutal. And the best part? Nate's friends and family rallied behind him. Julia had always been good at charming people, but this time, she'd gone too far. The evidence from the baby shower was too damning, and everyone had seen it. Clips of the presentation were circulating online. Strangers were tearing Julia apart in the comments, calling her everything from a homewrecker to a psychopath. Jay, on the other hand, was trying to keep a low profile. After I kicked him out, he went straight to my parents' house, where Julia was also staying. The irony wasn't lost on me. My cheating husband and my cheating sister holed up together like two rats in a sinking ship. My parents, of course, welcomed them with open arms because, God forbid, Julia ever faces the consequences of her actions. But even Jay couldn't stick it out for long. A week later, I heard through a mutual friend that he and Julia were fighting. Apparently, Jay had found out about Dan. I don't know how exactly. Maybe Mia's divorce paperwork mentioned it, or maybe Julia let it slip during one of her crocodile tear breakdowns. Either way, Jay wasn't happy. According to the friend, Jay confronted Julia about Dan, and she tried to brush it off, saying it was just a fling and didn't mean anything. Jay, being the hypocrite that he is, got all self-righteous about being cheated on. He packed his bags and left, leaving Julia crying on my parents' couch. When I heard about this, I laughed for a good 5 minutes. The audacity of Jay, a man who cheated on me for months, being mad that Julia cheated on him? It was almost too good to be true. The best part was that Julia had nowhere else to go. Nate didn't want her. Jay was done with her. And even Dan hadn't reached out to Julia since Mia served him with divorce papers. And according to Mia, he was barely even acknowledging the baby. Mia told me Julia had tried calling Dan multiple times, leaving desperate voicemails about how they needed to talk about their future. But he wasn't biting. I couldn't help but laugh. Julia had spent her whole life acting like everyone wanted to orbit around her. But now, she was completely alone. My parents tried to keep up appearances, pretending everything was fine. But even they couldn't ignore the mess. People in their social circle started talking, and the whispers weren't flattering. My mom called me one afternoon, probably hoping to smooth things over and convince me to come back into the fold. "Alina, sweetie," she started, using her best guilt trip voice. "I know things have been difficult lately, but we're still a family. We need to work through this together." I almost choked on my coffee. "You mean the same family that covered for Julia while she destroyed my marriage?" "Yeah, no thanks." "Alina, that's not fair," she said, her voice tightening. "We were just trying to keep the peace." "Peace?" I snapped. "That's not peace. That's enabling. And now you want me to just forget about it?" "Not happening." She tried a few more lines, but I wasn't budging. By the end of the call, it was clear that she and my dad were more concerned about saving face than actually fixing anything. I told her as much before hanging up. Julia, on the other hand, was spiraling. I didn't hear this directly. She wouldn't dare talk to me. But mutual friends started reaching out to spill the tea. Apparently, Julia wasn't handling the public backlash well. She tried deleting her social media accounts, but by then, screenshots of her and Jay's texts had been plastered everywhere. Strangers were tagging her in posts, dragging her name through the mud. Even her so-called friends were distancing themselves. One of her closest friends, Natalie, told me she hadn't spoken to Julia since the baby shower. "I can't believe she would do that to you," Natalie said. "And to Mia. Like, what kind of person does that?" I didn't have an answer. Julia wasn't just selfish. She was reckless. She never thought about how her actions would affect other people. And now, for the first time, she was paying the price. The cherry on top came when Julia gave birth a few weeks later. I didn't go to the hospital, obviously, but I heard through the grapevine that Nate insisted on a paternity test before signing anything. And it's easy to guess. The baby wasn't Nate's. It was Dan's. When Mia told me, I nearly fell off my chair. "You've got to be kidding me," I said. "Nope," Mia replied. "Nate called me himself. He said the test was clear as day. It's Dan's kid. He told Julia he's done with her for good." I could only imagine the look on Julia's face when she got the results. She'd already lost Nate, Jay, and Dan. Now she was stuck raising a baby on her own, with no one left to blame but herself. As for me, I was finally feeling free. My divorce from Jay was finalized a few weeks after the baby shower. It was, in a word, liberating. It wasn't easy, divorces never are, but compared to the emotional weight of the betrayal, the legal part was surprisingly straightforward. Jay didn't even try to fight me on it, which was probably the smartest thing he'd done in years. Maybe he felt guilty, or maybe he just wanted to move on as quickly as possible. Either way, I wasn't about to complain. I'd contacted a lawyer the morning after the baby shower. I didn't want to waste time wallowing or letting Jay think there was any chance of reconciliation. The lawyer was amazing, straight to the point, empathetic, and clearly someone who had seen plenty of cases like mine. "You're doing the right thing," she said, after I finished explaining the situation. "People like Jay don't change, and you deserve better." We went through all the necessary steps, and thankfully, there wasn't much to fight over. Jay and I didn't have kids, which made things simpler, and we'd only bought the house together a few years ago. It wasn't fully paid off, so we agreed to sell it and split the proceeds. He tried to bring up some small stuff, like the furniture or the TV, but I didn't care. He could take whatever he wanted as long as he was out of my life. The hardest part wasn't the legal process. It was the emotional toll. Signing those papers felt like both an ending and a beginning. On one hand, it was heartbreaking to see my marriage, something I thought would last forever, reduced to a pile of documents and signatures. On the other hand, it was the final step in reclaiming my life. For too long, I'd let Jay's lies and Julia's manipulation define my reality. This was my chance to start over. The day the divorce was finalized, I threw out everything that reminded me of Jay. Old photos, his clothes, even the stupid mug he always used for coffee. It all went in the trash. It wasn't about being petty. Okay, maybe a little. It was about cleansing my space of the negativity he brought into my life. I didn't want any reminders of the man who betrayed me, the man who chose my sister over me. What surprised me the most was how quickly I felt a sense of relief. For the first time in months, maybe even years, I didn't feel like I was carrying the weight of Jay's lies on my shoulders. My apartment was small and modest, but it was mine, and it felt more like home than the house I'd shared with him ever did. Jay tried reaching out a couple of times after the divorce was finalized. His texts were pathetic, full of half-hearted apologies and vague promises about being a better person. I ignored every single one. He had his chance to be a better person, and he blew it. There was no going back. My parents kept trying to reach out, but I ignored their calls. I didn't need their half-baked apologies or their excuses. Julia could be their problem now. In the end, everything Julia had built, the fake perfect life, the lies, the manipulation, came crashing down. And honestly, it was satisfying to watch.
I remember the day I met Ethan as if it were yesterday. I was 25, just starting to carve out my place in the family business. It was a sunny afternoon in Birmingham, and the city was bustling with the usual energy. Ethan was introduced to me at a mutual friend's party, and there was something about him that immediately drew me in. He was charming, hardworking, and seemed to genuinely appreciate the simple things in life. We clicked instantly, and it didn't take long for us to start dating seriously. We married within a year of our first meeting. Ethan was 27, and I was 26. It felt like the right thing to do. Both of us were at a stage in life where we wanted stability. I had just finished my degree and was working in my family's retail chain business. My father, Robert, was the CEO, and I was learning the ropes, mostly handling administrative tasks while my father dealt with the strategic side of things. I was set to inherit the company one day, and despite the enormous expectations, I was content with my life and responsibilities. Ethan, on the other hand, worked as a warehouse manager for a local logistics company. He had completed high school and had a practical, hands-on approach to work that I admired. His job was demanding, and I knew it was not easy for him, especially with the physical labor involved. Yet, he never complained. He was proud of what he did, and I respected that about him. In the beginning, our marriage was smooth sailing. We supported each other, and our life together was filled with laughter and shared dreams. We talked about starting a family and looked forward to the future. However, as the years passed, our relationship began to shift. The joy we once shared seemed to fade, replaced by an undercurrent of tension and dissatisfaction. After 15 years of marriage, things took a turn for the worse. Ethan and I had been trying to have children for a while, but despite our efforts, we were unsuccessful. The frustration began to erode our bond. Ethan, who had always been patient and kind, started to change. He became distant and bitter, often placing the blame on me. It wasn't just the disappointment of not having children. It was how he began to view me as the source of his unhappiness. His late nights at work increased, and his once warm demeanor turned cold. I tried everything I could to help, including fertility tests, but Ethan was resistant. He refused to see a specialist, and his behavior grew more erratic. I began to suspect something more troubling was going on. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something he wasn't telling me. One fateful day, Ethan accidentally left his phone at home. I wasn't one to snoop, but something compelled me to check his messages. It was a decision that would change everything. A call came through from a young woman named Sarah, who spoke of a date with Ethan. My heart sank as I listened to the conversation. The betrayal was clear, and my world felt like it was collapsing around me. I didn't confront Ethan right away. Instead, I started gathering evidence quietly, knowing that the revelation of his infidelity would be a pivotal moment in our relationship. It wasn't just the fact that he had been unfaithful, It was the realization that the trust and love we once had were shattered beyond repair. Months passed, and the situation grew increasingly strained. One day, Ethan suggested we separate. To my surprise, I felt a sense of relief. I had already been contemplating the end of our marriage, and his suggestion seemed to be the catalyst I needed. We went through with the divorce, and I tried to move on, but the pain was still fresh. Then came the news that Ethan had quickly remarried. He proudly flaunted his new relationship with Sarah, the teenage daughter of the CEO of Lawrence Holdings, a prominent manufacturing firm. It seemed that Ethan had found a new source of wealth and status through his new wife. He mocked my modest lifestyle and seemed to take pleasure in my perceived misfortune. I stayed calm, even though his smugness stung. I knew that Ethan's newfound happiness was built on shaky ground. Little did he know that my family had a stake in Lawrence Holdings. My father's company owned the building that housed their operations, and I had a front-row seat to their struggles. It was in Manchester, at a high-end hotel, where the true drama unfolded. Ethan and Sarah were staying there, and fate had a way of bringing us face to face. Ethan, with his usual arrogance, boasted about marrying into wealth and finally achieving the status he had always desired. I listened in silence, my mind racing as I prepared to reveal the truth. As the conversation unfolded, I realized how far Ethan had fallen. His new life, built on the illusion of grandeur, was about to come crashing down. Little did he know, his dream of wealth was as fragile as the promises he made to me. The day I saw Ethan and Sarah at the hotel in Manchester was one I'll never forget. I had been steeling myself for this encounter, knowing that the truth about Lawrence Holdings and its financial troubles could shake Ethan to his core. As I walked into the elegant lobby of the hotel, I spotted them almost immediately. Ethan, looking every bit the smug man who thought he had it all, was by Sarah's side. They were engaged in animated conversation, clearly enjoying the luxuries their new life seemed to offer. My heart raced with a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, but also a profound sense of resolve. I had been preparing for this moment for weeks, gathering all the information I needed. I had already learned that Lawrence Holdings was struggling with financial instability and had accumulated several months of unpaid rent. My family's retail business had recently acquired the building where Lawrence Holdings operated, which meant I had direct insight into their financial difficulties. I approached them with as much composure as I could muster. Ethan's face lit up with that familiar, self-satisfied grin when he saw me. Sarah looked at me with a mix of curiosity and disdain, perhaps feeling some sense of superiority over me. "Rosie," Ethan exclaimed, his tone both surprised and overly friendly. "What a coincidence. I didn't expect to see you here." I managed a polite smile.
"Ethan. Sarah."
"Yes, it's quite a coincidence. I didn't expect to see you either." I could see Ethan's eyes dart nervously, but he quickly masked his unease with a forced grin. We exchanged pleasantries, and I noticed Sarah's eyes flicking between us, clearly intrigued by the tension. "So, how are you enjoying the hotel?" I asked, my tone light, but my mind focused on the upcoming revelation. Ethan was quick to boast. "It's fantastic. Sarah and I have been enjoying all the luxuries that come with her family's success. It's a whole new world for us." I nodded, trying to hide my smirk. "I'm glad to hear you're enjoying it. You know, Ethan, there's something I need to tell you. You see, my family's company recently acquired the building where Lawrence Holdings operates." Ethan's face grew puzzled. "Really? I didn't realize that. Why didn't you mention it before?" I leaned in slightly, savoring the moment. "Well, there's something else you should know. I've heard some concerning things about Lawrence Holdings. It seems they've been facing some financial troubles lately." Ethan's expression changed from curiosity to concern. "Financial troubles? What do you mean?" I took a deep breath and continued. "I've seen the records myself. Lawrence Holdings is behind on several months of rent, and it appears there are serious issues with their financial management. The company's situation is far from as rosy as you might have been led to believe." Sarah's eyes widened, and Ethan's face grew pale. "You must be mistaken," Ethan stammered. "The company is doing well. We've been assured of its stability." I shook my head. "I wish that were true. The building's ownership and financial records are in my family's hands, and I have the proof right here. I pulled out a few documents, including some financial statements that clearly showed Lawrence Holdings' overdue payments and mounting financial problems. Ethan and Sarah looked at the papers in disbelief. The reality of their situation began to sink in. I could see the cracks forming in the facade Ethan had so proudly displayed. He tried to regain his composure, but the damage was done. The illusion of wealth and success he had clung to was crumbling before his eyes. "What does this mean?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It means," I replied calmly, "that the financial security you thought you had isn't as solid as you believed. The company's struggles are significant, and the wealth you thought you were marrying into might not be as substantial as you imagined." Ethan's face flushed with a mix of anger and embarrassment. Sarah looked mortified, clearly realizing that the glamorous life she had been promised was in jeopardy. The silence that followed was thick with tension. Ethan tried to muster a defense, but failed to come up with anything substantial. The reality of their situation was too stark, too undeniable. As I watched the realization dawn on them, I felt a sense of satisfaction, but also a twinge of sadness. It wasn't that I took pleasure in their misfortune. It was more about the justice of it all. Ethan had left me for a false promise of wealth and status, and now he was facing the consequences of his shallow decisions. I took one last look at them and said, "I hope you both find a way to handle this." It's never easy facing the truth, especially when it's not what you hoped for. With that, I turned and walked away, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. The encounter left me with a lingering sense of unresolved emotions. It was clear that Ethan's new life was beginning to unravel, and as much as I had moved on from our past, seeing him confronted with the reality of his choices was a stark reminder of the pain he had caused. As I left the hotel, I couldn't help but reflect on how much my life had changed. Despite the heartache and betrayal, I had grown stronger, more resilient. The journey ahead was mine to shape, free from the shadows of the past. After my encounter with Ethan and Sarah, I felt a sense of closure, but I still had one more crucial chapter to write in my story. The aftermath of that confrontation began to unfold, and the reality of my own life continued to evolve in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. I knew that while Ethan's world was collapsing, my own was moving forward in a new, positive direction. Weeks passed, and the news about Lawrence Holdings' financial troubles began to seep into the broader business community. It wasn't long before reports of a major fraud scandal at the company surfaced, further destabilizing their already precarious position. The firm had been caught in a web of financial mismanagement, and the £3 billion empire that Ethan and Sarah had banked on was in jeopardy. I watched with a mix of detachment and relief as Ethan's new marriage started to falter. The illusion of a glamorous life was quickly replaced by the harsh reality of mounting debts and a failing business. Ethan's attempts to maintain a facade of success were increasingly futile. His once confident demeanor was replaced by visible anxiety and frustration. I could only imagine how disheartened he must have been as the once ideal life he had pursued so fervently began to crumble. Despite all this, my life was taking a turn for the better. I had been working hard to rebuild my sense of self and to focus on my future. The divorce, though painful, had ultimately been a catalyst for personal growth. I found solace and strength in my work at the family business, where my role was becoming more significant. My father had been supportive, and I was starting to take on more responsibilities as the future leader of our successful retail chain.
But there was more to my story.
In the midst of all these changes, I met someone new, someone who brought genuine joy and stability into my life. His name was Jack, and he was everything Ethan wasn't. Where Ethan had been distant and dismissive, Jack was kind and attentive. He was a supportive partner who believed in me and my dreams. Our relationship grew steadily, and with it came a newfound sense of happiness and hope for the future. The most profound revelation came when I discovered I was pregnant. The news filled me with a mix of emotions, joy, anticipation, and a touch of disbelief. My infertility, which had been a source of pain and blame in my previous marriage, was no longer an issue. I was going to become a mother, and it was a testament to the fact that my worth wasn't defined by Ethan's misguided judgments or our failed relationship. I couldn't wait to share the news with my family and with Jack. Their support was unwavering, and I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the way they stood by me. Jack was ecstatic about the pregnancy, and we began planning our future together, filled with optimism and excitement. As the months went by, Ethan's life continued to deteriorate. The fraud scandal at Lawrence Holdings gained more media attention, and the company faced mounting legal troubles. Ethan and Sarah's attempts to salvage their reputation were in vain, and the financial strain became increasingly apparent. Their world, once seemingly perfect, was now a chaotic mess of legal battles and financial ruin. During this time, my father's company had become even more prominent in the business world. The acquisition of the building that housed Lawrence Holdings had proven to be a strategic move, further solidifying our position in the market. Our retail chain was thriving, and the company's overall valuation had reached an impressive £3 billion. It was a stark contrast to the collapsing empire that Ethan had sought to align himself with. One evening, as I was preparing for a quiet night in with Jack, I received a phone call from my father. He had some news that was both exciting and significant. "Emily," he said, "I've just finalized a new deal that's going to make our company even stronger. We've acquired a major new contract, and our position in the market is more solid than ever." I could hear the pride in his voice, and it filled me with a sense of accomplishment. "That's wonderful news, Dad," I replied. "I'm so glad to hear it. Everything seems to be falling into place." As I hung up, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The challenges I had faced, the heartbreak I had endured, and the journey I had undertaken were all leading me to a brighter future. The shadow of my past was fading, replaced by the promise of a new beginning. I was no longer defined by the failures or betrayals of my past, but was forging a new path with confidence and hope. Reflecting on everything that had transpired, I realized how far I had come. I had faced the pain of betrayal, confronted the harsh realities of Ethan's decisions, and emerged stronger and more resilient. My new life, with Jack and our upcoming baby, was a testament to my growth and my ability to overcome the obstacles in my path. As the final pieces of Ethan's crumbling world continued to unfold, I remained focused on my own journey. The past was behind me, and the future was bright with possibilities. I had found my strength and my worth, and I was ready to embrace whatever came next with optimism and grace. As the final chapters of my story continued to unfold, I found myself reflecting on the incredible journey I had been through. Ethan's life was spiraling, and my own path was leading me to a future I had never imagined, but one that felt perfectly right. It was time for me to close this chapter and fully embrace the new life I had built. The media frenzy around Lawrence Holdings' fraud scandal reached its peak. The firm, under the scrutiny of regulators and journalists, faced the severe repercussions of its financial mismanagement. The company was not only in disarray, but was on the brink of collapse. The once prominent firm was now a cautionary tale of greed and deception, and Ethan and Sarah were at the center of it all. I followed the news from a distance, not out of bitterness, but out of a need to understand how the ripples of Ethan's choices had affected his world. It was a grim reminder of how quickly fortunes could change, and it reinforced my decision to leave behind the pain and embrace a fresh start. The financial ruin of Lawrence Holdings was a direct result of the fraud scandal, and the £3 billion empire that had seemed so secure was unraveling. Ethan's involvement in the scandal became a public embarrassment, and the life he had once boasted about was now a symbol of failure. During this turbulent time, I continued to focus on my own growth and the happiness I was building with Jack. Our relationship was flourishing, and we were eagerly preparing for the arrival of our baby. The excitement of becoming a parent brought a new dimension to our lives, and Jack's unwavering support made everything feel possible. The joy of planning for our future, coupled with the anticipation of welcoming a new life into the world, provided a stark contrast to the turmoil of my past. In the midst of all this, I received an unexpected call from my father. He had some significant news to share. "Emily, I wanted to let you know that we've made another major acquisition." The company's growth is exceeding our expectations, and our position in the market is stronger than ever. I felt a swell of pride and relief. That's fantastic news, Dad. I'm so proud of what we've achieved. My father continued, and there's more. Our valuation has officially reached £3 billion. We've also secured a new partnership that's going to propel us even further. I thought you'd want to hear this, especially with everything you've been through. Hearing this was a moment of profound satisfaction for me. The company's success was not just a testament to my father's leadership, but also to the strength and resilience I had developed. Our family business was thriving, and I was set to take on a significant role in its future. The journey from the pain of betrayal to this point was a testament to my growth and determination. As my father's company continued to prosper, Ethan and Sarah's world continued to disintegrate. The once confident facade they had presented was now replaced by a harsh reality. The financial scandal had left them with mounting debts, and their efforts to recover from the mess had been largely unsuccessful. It was a striking example of how the pursuit of superficial wealth and status could lead to downfall. In contrast, my life was filled with hope and promise. I was eagerly anticipating the arrival of our baby and preparing for a future that was brighter than I had ever imagined. Jack and I had created a loving home, and the support of my family and friends was a constant source of strength. The sense of fulfillment I found in my personal and professional life was a direct result of my resilience and the choices I had made. The day finally arrived when our baby was born. Holding our child for the first time was an indescribable moment of joy and love. Jack and I were overjoyed, and our new family felt complete. The challenges of the past seemed distant, overshadowed by the joy of this new beginning. It was a reminder that life had the capacity to heal and to offer new opportunities, even after the darkest of times. As I looked back on everything that had happened, Ethan's betrayal, the financial ruin of Lawrence Holdings, and the personal growth I had experienced, I felt a deep sense of peace. I had faced adversity with strength and grace, and I had emerged from it with a renewed sense of self-worth and a clear vision for the future. My story, while marked by pain and hardship, was ultimately one of triumph and transformation. I had learned that true worth comes from within, and that resilience can turn even the most challenging situations into opportunities for growth. The future was bright, filled with promise and potential, and I was ready to embrace it with open arms. Ethan's story, on the other hand, was a cautionary tale of misplaced priorities and failed ambitions. His once seemingly perfect life had crumbled under the weight of his own choices. It was a stark contrast to the life I was building, one grounded in genuine happiness, love, and the realization of my own potential. As I looked ahead, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey I had undertaken and the lessons I had learned. My life was now a testament to the power of resilience, the value of self-worth, and the promise of new beginnings. And with that, I embraced the future with hope, knowing that I had the strength to face whatever came next.
I'm 29 and I recently got a call from my mother. I hadn't talked to her in almost 5 years. She said she needed my help because my sister and her husband had just gone through a tragedy. Here's some background. The man who is now my sister's husband was once supposed to be my husband. My sister Melissa, who's 27, hooked up with my fiancé Lucas, 29, on the day of my engagement. Lucas and I had been together since college, and he proposed to me after almost 5 years of dating. He'd thrown a party for us to surprise me on the night of our engagement, and I still remember feeling like I was on top of the world. Until around 1 p.m., when I decided to go out into the backyard for better reception and caught my sister all over Lucas. They were making out so passionately that for the first couple of seconds, they didn't even notice me standing there with my mouth wide open. I couldn't believe that he was doing this to me after almost 5 years of togetherness, and on the night of our engagement, no less. When they finally did take note of me, they broke apart instantly, but it was too late. I made a run for it, got into my car, and drove as fast as I could to the nearest hotel I could find. I was hyperventilating because I was so shocked at what I had witnessed. I was somehow trying to process it and willing it to be untrue. Then I received a text from Melissa saying that she was sorry, but she was in love with Lucas, and apparently this had been going on for a really long time. I was in the hotel room when I received that text and broke down like never before. After Melissa, Lucas texted me pretty much the same thing and said that he had only proposed because he felt that if he committed to me, he would be able to push Melissa out of his head. Obviously, that hadn't worked, and it made him want Melissa even more. He told me that it wasn't about me, but this was about them, and they just knew that they were meant to be. I was just a placeholder and the way for Lucas to finally meet Melissa. I stayed at the hotel for a couple of days and tried to put my act together because I was still feeling crazy and trying to force myself to believe that this was just a cruel prank that life was playing on me. After almost 4 days, I finally went back home because I did need to collect my stuff and rejoin work if I didn't want to get fired. When I showed up at home, I realized that my family had been living with Lucas under the same roof, waiting for me to come back. It would almost be touching had it not been for the circumstances under which I left. Everybody had been trying to text me and get me to respond relentlessly after I disappeared, but I hadn't replied to a single one of those texts. So, needless to say, there was a lot of chaos when I finally came back. Everybody made it a point to hug me and tell me how glad they were to see me. Even Melissa had the audacity to come to me and give me a giant hug with tears in her eyes when she saw me. I was too disoriented to even react to that and just stood there like a silent statue while everyone clamored around me. Then finally, once everybody had calmed down, I cleared my throat and told them that I was back only to take my things and move out for good. Lucas had just been standing there without a word until that point, but when I said that I was going to move out, he announced that there was no need for me to leave because he'd already packed his stuff and was going to move in with Melissa since now everything was out in the open anyway. My family, my parents, my aunt, and my dad's youngest sister, who has lived in the same house ever since her husband passed away, actually had wide smiles on their faces, even though there was nothing to smile about, at least not according to me. Melissa was standing beside Lucas in an awkward hug and looked at me very sadly but still smiling. I couldn't take it anymore and decided to ask my family what the heck they were even smiling about because, as far as I was concerned, Melissa had just broken up my engagement and stolen my boyfriend of almost 5 years. There was really nothing very funny or sweet about this. My mother chose to speak up at that point and told me that they couldn't go back in time and change the past, but they could accept the future, and they knew that the future had Melissa and Lucas together in it. Granted, it was a relationship that had formed out of cheating, and they did feel sorry about it, but they also wanted me to understand and accept that this was for the best. Melissa said that she was very sorry for taking my boyfriend away from me, but she couldn't help falling in love with him. She wished that she could have told me earlier and I didn't have to find out this way, but apparently they were madly in love and wanted to spend their lives with each other. Then the two of them kissed right in front of me, and my mother had the audacity to even wipe a tear from her eyes. I snapped and told them that this wasn't supposed to be sentimental or emotional, and that what they were doing was disgusting. To my surprise, my family seemed to get annoyed with my behavior and told me that I was being too bratty about the situation. Instead of being happy for my sister, I was making this all about myself and they didn't approve of my behavior. I was shocked by their attitude and immediately told everyone to get out of my house. I couldn't believe they were defending what Melissa and Lucas had done while making me seem like the bad guy. They acted like I was overreacting. My father stepped in and told me to stop acting like a child. He said these things happen and I should just take it in stride. He wanted me to celebrate that my sister had finally found her soulmate instead of being jealous of her. They were literally all acting insane, and I couldn't deal with it anymore. So I just said screw it, went into my room, packed some of my things, and left yet again without even speaking to them or waiting to hear them out, even as they called out my name and told me not to go. I really didn't have anything left to say to them because it was very clear to me that they cared more about Melissa and her happiness than about me or even about what was right and wrong. They were so caught up in trying to justify what Melissa had done that they completely forgot that I was also a human being with real feelings as well. After that day, my family tried to contact me several times, but I never responded to them because I didn't think that I owed it to them. A couple of weeks later, I even received an invitation to Melissa and Lucas's wedding, which I declined, obviously. All the common friends that Lucas and I had also declined the wedding invitation in solidarity with me. Even a couple of relatives who knew the truth refused to interact with my family after they learned how they had treated me in the aftermath of the party. It's been 5 years, and I have pretty much cut them out of my life entirely. They occasionally tried to weasel their way back into my life by wishing me well on my birthday or New Year, but I always ignore them. I never even blocked any of them, even though I did remove them from my following and friends list. Since I have a public account, they could see what I was up to, which is what I wanted. I wanted them to see and to know that I was leading a fabulous life and keep burning with jealousy. It was petty, but it was the least I could do after how they screwed me over. Up until recently, I barely even had a clue of what they'd been up to in the last couple of years. My mother called me about 4 days ago from a number that I didn't have saved. When I answered the call and realized that it was my mom on the other end, I immediately tried to hang up. But she begged me desperately for one chance to talk to me because apparently they were in dire need of help. I agreed to talk to her for just a couple of minutes, but only because she sounded so upset, and my humanity didn't allow me to turn my back on her at that moment. She told me that Melissa and Lucas had started a business of their own a couple of years ago, but it was failing badly. Their investors were all backing out because they were failing to make any profit at all. So they borrowed more money, but even that didn't help their business, and now they were neck-deep in debt, and the loan sharks were all after them. They were being hounded by everyone from their employees to their investors and the people they had borrowed money from. My mother knew that I lived a luxurious lifestyle and could afford to help them out, so she had turned to me as a last resort and was begging me to help them out by loaning them some money so they could pay off their debts. It was no small amount either that she was asking me for. It was almost $75,000 that she wanted me to give her so she could help Melissa and Lucas out. I asked her why Melissa wasn't calling me if she needed help, and why she was making my mother speak to me on her behalf. My mother told me that Melissa and Lucas didn't even know that she was coming to me for help, as they had given her strict instructions not to approach me because, I guess, we all still remember exactly what happened 5 years ago. Melissa didn't want me to know any of this and wasn't ready to take help from me, but my mother didn't know anybody else who would have that kind of money and would give it to them at the drop of a hat. A couple of months had already passed, and Melissa and Lucas were struggling to even put food on the table. My parents were helping them all they could, and even Lucas's family were trying to give them all that they possibly could, but it was just not enough. Even they had to be able to support themselves in the future, so it was impossible for them to just give away all the money that they'd saved over the years, especially because most of my family was retired, and so were Lucas's parents. That's why my mother, with no other option left, had called me to request help. Now, I could afford to help them out, but I really didn't want to. Melissa was right for not contacting me to ask for help. They lost the right to make any demands from me the day that they cheated on me. I told my mother that I couldn't help them, and even if I could, I wouldn't. My mother sounded very upset and told me that I was being cruel and needed to think about my family. I told her that Melissa and Lucas hadn't thought about me when they had that affair, and neither did my family think about me while they were supporting the two of them. So right now there was no need for me to think about them either. I had worked hard to get to the position where I am today, and I wasn't about to just go and drop $75,000 on two people who didn't even deserve it. My mother then began to cry on the phone and told me that she had never expected me to grow up to be so selfish. She claimed that my sister and her husband would end up in big trouble if I didn't help them out. I said that it was just too bad, but I couldn't help them, and then I hung up. Since then, my mother has been sending me several texts every hour begging me to reconsider and think about my sister for once. She said that this was not the time for petty revenge and that the trouble Melissa was in was very serious. If I didn't help her now, I really would regret it in the future. She's being crazy, and I don't understand what to say to her because I don't want to feel like the bad guy here either. Am I the asshole for not helping my sister out financially after she stole my fiancé 5 years ago? Update. So I finally blocked my family. I didn't do it earlier because I wanted them to see what I was up to and feel jealous. Plus, I was afraid that cutting them off completely might be something I'd regret if anything bad happened to them. But I don't really care now. I should have removed them 5 years ago. I don't understand why I even kept them around so long. That is what was petty of me. Refusing to help my sister out now isn't petty. It's just the logical thing to do. They'd already wasted tons and tons of money, and I'm sure that even if I give them the money right now, they won't be able to repay it. $75,000 is a pretty big amount. I might be well off, but that doesn't mean I can just drop that sort of money and not expect it back. If this was a close friend of mine who I was helping, I still would expect that money back. Here, these are neither people who are close to me nor my loved ones, nor can I expect them to pay me back. So there's really no reason for me to help them out. It's as simple as that. I told a couple of my friends about this too to get their opinion on it, and they agreed that I did the right thing by refusing to give them the money. Not even out of a feeling of revenge, but mostly because it was completely impractical and stupid to even expect me to help them when they were the ones who had screwed me over in the past. But anyway, my mother is blocked now, and she can't contact me to guilt-trip me anymore, so I have nothing to worry about. Update 2. Hi guys, so something really big happened today. I was at work when I received a call from my neighbor saying that there was a couple outside my house who was screaming for me to come out and talk to them. My neighbor told me that they seemed pretty crazy and had been screaming at the door for about an hour, refusing to leave. I asked her for a description of them, but in my heart I already knew who it was. She told me how they looked, and it just confirmed that I was indeed going to run into Melissa and Lucas. When I got back home, my neighbor told me that I needed to come back and deal with this because she didn't think that these two were up to any good, and I agreed. When it was Melissa and Lucas that we were talking about, they could never be up to any good, so I thanked her and started driving back home immediately because I couldn't risk them getting into my house at any cost. I arrived in about 15 minutes and caught them trying to break into my house by picking the lock. I pulled up in front of my place and asked them what they thought they were doing. I tried to call the police right away, but Lucas was quick. He rushed over and knocked the phone out of my hand. Melissa also walked over to me and told me that they were here just to talk and they didn't want anything from me. Not at the moment, at least. I told them to make it quick and also said that they shouldn't expect me to invite them inside, so whatever they had to talk about had to be discussed out there in the yard. They seemed to be okay with that, which was a relief because I really didn't think that it would be a good idea to invite those two inside close quarters. They already seemed pretty hostile, so I didn't know what to expect. Since they said they didn't want anything from me, Melissa started talking. She told me that my mother had told her about the phone call and how I'd ignored the subsequent text from her and then even blocked them all. She told me that the way I was behaving was very unfair and that it had been 5 years since then, so I should really be over it by now. Instead, I was resorting to such silly and dramatic acts just to get a little bit of attention from my family. She said that she felt very insulted because of how I had refused to help them, and that's what she was here to talk to me about. She said that she'd been able to arrange the money for now, but there was a very strong chance that she might need more in the future. Because she'd sold their house and all their jewelry to get the money this time, she obviously couldn't do that again. So she had to know that she could fall back on me and rely on me for help when she needed it. I told her that no, she couldn't, and she must not count on me at all under any circumstances, because I hate her and her husband with a passion. I was so angry that I also told her that it was taking me a lot of restraint to not hit her at the moment, so it would be in their best interest to just leave. Lucas had the audacity to say that they weren't going anywhere until I signed a document that would confirm that I would give the money in the future whenever they needed it. I mean, it wouldn't even be valid if I was forced to do it under pressure. I'm pretty sure there are laws against it, and also they must be insane if they actually thought that they could manipulate me into signing something like that. I told both of them to get the hell out, and Melissa pushed me, saying that I had to help them because apparently I owed this to them since they were family. And I couldn't just run away from my responsibilities like this. I was shocked that she'd actually pushed me, and I was about to slap her, but I controlled the urge to do that because things would only get worse if I got violent. Instead, I decided to grab my phone, which had fallen to the ground when Lucas knocked it out of my hand and made a run for it. I climbed into my car as quickly as I could and then drove off without even bothering to check my rearview mirror. I hadn't bothered to shut off the engine when I had left the car, so it was still running, and it didn't take me much time to get a head start on them. Obviously, they were not stupid enough to chase after me on foot, so they just waited there at my house, which was pretty unfortunate. As soon as I was a safe distance away from them, I decided to call the police and tell them what was going on. Then I drove back to my house just in the nick of time before the police had already arrived within 20 minutes. I filled them in on everything, and they arrested and took Melissa and Lucas away. I knew that the charges weren't that serious and they would get off pretty easily, but it was still worth it because at least they were taken away and I didn't have to waste any more of my time with them. It's been a couple of hours since then, and I haven't heard from anyone in my family, which is strange because I'd figured that by now at least one of them would have tried to contact me from some other numbers. But they haven't, so I'm guessing that they're either just over everything and aren't going to try and get under my skin again, or they're just waiting it out and biding their time so they can contact me later when things are a little less tense. Update 3. Hi. So the last update was about a week ago, and I'd honestly started to believe that my family was actually not going to bother me again because I had called the cops on Melissa and Lucas. But I was wrong. Even that didn't stop them from disturbing me yet again, and this time it was my parents who showed up at my house asking me if they could speak to me for a moment. This happened yesterday, and they seemed a lot less cocky and arrogant compared to Melissa and Lucas, so I let them in. My mother started crying pretty much as soon as she entered the house and told me how sorry she was that she'd ever taken Melissa's side over mine. My father told me that after they learned of Melissa and Lucas being arrested because of their behavior, and also that they had physically pushed me, they couldn't bring themselves to look at them the same way, and had decided that they were going to cut them off. My mother continued to cry throughout the time that she was here, while my father explained that they were apologetic for siding with Melissa in the past when it was actually me who was the victim. While I said that I did appreciate them for finally coming to their senses, but right now it was too little and too late for things to get better. I was used to living my life on my own terms now, and I didn't want to go back to putting my family before myself. So as much as I appreciated their visit and apology to me, I really couldn't promise them that I would work on this relationship because I just didn't feel that there was any point in trying to salvage an already ruined relationship, even if it is with my parents. They protested a little at that point and said that we could fix this if we wanted to, but that was exactly where the problem was. I didn't want to anymore. I just wanted to be by myself, that's all. And I told them I respected their efforts, but I was done here. They seemed a little disappointed, but eventually they left and asked me if I could at least unblock them so they could keep in touch. I have unblocked my parents, which feels weird, but yeah, I guess that's it.